starting the presentation now, and the first presentation is by the dentist from Whangarei, Dr. Lawrie Brett. Please welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Kia ora katoa. My name is Lawrie Brett. I am a general practice dentist in Whangarei. I've practiced dentistry there for 35 years, and for all of that time I've been a keen sort of amateur researcher of the chemistry of fluorine, and I was staying in Parnell actually, and I was walking up there on this beautiful day that we've had today, and I came across the Sir Dovemeyer Robinson Rose Park, and I thought that was very relevant to my career as a dentist, because it was Sir Dovemeyer Robinson, in fact, who alerted me to the whole debate about fluoridation of water supplies. When I returned from my obligatory overseas travel experiences, I noticed an article in the paper referring to a speech that he had made about a court case that had occurred in the United States of America, where a jury, after one of the most protracted court cases in the history of the United States, had found that the incidence of cancer in unfluoridated communities, they'd studied 10 large cities, was lower than the incidence of cancer in the fluoridated cities. Well, my professor of preventive dentistry at the University of Otago, Professor Beck, printed a disclaimer in the Dominion newspaper saying that that wasn't true because certain criteria in the research processes hadn't been met, and that actually that was incorrect. It turns out that in fact the correct protocols had been followed in this case, and that I was very interested to see what the ins and outs of this argument was, so I wrote a letter to both Professor Beck and Sir Dovemeyer Robinson, and I received no reply from Professor Beck, and I received a thing about this big of research data from Sir Dovemeyer Robinson. He said, "Read this and you'll know all about it." So I did, and at that time he also said that I should contact Dr. John Colquhoun, who was the then Principal Dental Officer for the Auckland region, which is to say he was the sort of the head of dental service provision from the government point of view for the Auckland region. He was also the spokesperson for the Fluoridation sort of society, or the New Zealand Dental Association at that time. As part of that role, John Colquhoun was sent off around the world on a tour of the fluoridated cities and countries to sort of touch base with what was happening around the world, and wherever he went, the people involved in the fluoridation programs came to him and said, "Hey, look, just quietly, it's not happening here, it's not changing, we're not seeing the benefit." So when he came back to Auckland, he had this huge database of all the school dental clinics that provided him with treatment records for the children, and he carried out a research program there. He actually had a PhD in this field and was the honorary research fellow for Auckland University. So, and yes, what he found was that there was no statistical difference between fluoridated and non-fluoridated dentitions. He changed his view then and there and lost his career and his respect in the profession, and suffered terribly for his conviction. And I think we owe Sir Dovemeyer Robinson and John Colquhoun a huge debt there for people who pursued the truth and found it and stuck to it. So there's my tribute to them. So I began practice in Whangarei and kept my sort of, in those days there was no internet. If you wanted to find out anything overseas, you had to write a letter to the University of Prague or whatever and wait 3 months for a reply, and you know, it was a long, slow process, and it was a very lonely process too, I might say. But as I went on, the conviction grew in my mind that I was onto the right thing, because in 1983 they stopped fluoridation in Timaru, and there was a huge hue and cry then about the fact that there would be an epidemic of dental decay in Timaru, and they had a big media beat up about it. And in fact, when was it? 1992. This was a headline in the Timaru Herald: dental decay soars in Timaru. Well, that was and is still a lie. The dental decay rates in Timaru after fluoridation stopped actually decreased at a rate greater than the surrounding fluoridated areas. So this is the kind of stuff that is going on. Tauranga ceased fluoridation in 1992, and again there was the same prediction of disastrous consequences, but there's been no word of a caries epidemic or a dental decay epidemic in Tauranga. Surely, if that had been the case, the Ministry of Health would have wasted no time in using that as a powerful tool to promote fluoridation in our communities. But they don't. And the reason? Because there hasn't been a change in the caries rates in these places once they stopped fluoridating water. This is a case all over the world. All of Europe has stopped fluoridating water. Countries, Cuba, Finland, what was used to be East Germany, all took national legislative steps to stop fluoridating, and their decay rates have not increased. Now this is incontrovertible. I'd like to talk now a little bit about a review process that took place in the year 2000 called the York Review, and the University of York in the United Kingdom carried out the first sort of complete review of all research pertaining to water fluoridation. It had its limitations as a document, but it was actually a very objective attempt to come to some sort of conclusions about water fluoridation. The overall conclusions were that there may, and I repeat, may be a reduction in decay in fluoridated communities, but that the research quality is so poor that you can't actually draw conclusions from it. And the reason for this is that, and New Zealand is a very good example of this sort of situation, is that you have data collected by fluoride promoting school dental nurses. That same data is then processed by fluoride promoting dentists who are funded by fluoride promoting ministries of health. The sample sizes are small, there's no double-blind testing. This renders this type of research really meaningless. It's a waste of money to even start to do it. You need large-scale, unbiased studies, and there just aren't enough of them to draw a conclusion. Secondly, and I think this is really important, is that there has never been any research carried out by the promoters of fluorine in water to prove that it's safe. Not one research program. Now, what does that tell you? The third thing is that there is no proof of a specific socio-economic benefit. That is to say that the poor, the disadvantaged, do not show a particular additional benefit from having their water fluoridated. Now, this is particularly relevant in New Zealand because you'll hear it all the time that the claim is made by the Ministry of Health and the DHBs that the great thing about it is that it sort of levels the playing field for the poor and the disadvantaged, and that their teeth are going to be particularly well served by having the fluoride in their water. This is just emotive propaganda. You know, we have to be aware of this. And speaking of emotive propaganda, we just look at the recent debate here in Queensland, which has actually distanced itself completely from a state legislated fluoridation program, which is hugely progressive on their part, I'd have to say. Here we go. Townsville has 65% less tooth decay than non-fluoridated Brisbane. Now this is how we arrive at that 65%. You look at the DMF figures, which means decayed, missing, filled teeth. In other words, teeth that have been affected by tooth decay. In Townsville, the average tooth surface that's affected is a tiny amount, 0.09 of a surface. That is a very, very low incidence of decay. In Queensland, it's a whopping quarter of a tooth surface. A quarter of a tooth surface. And the difference, yes, is 65%. Let's trumpet that. But actually what it is, the absolute difference is 0.17 of one surface of one tooth. Now that is clinically and statistically absolutely meaningless, but it's used as advertising propaganda. Now see on our right here, that's the slide that they use to show the consequences of not having fluoride in your water. Well, by that standard, everyone in my hometown of Whangarei should be walking around looking like bling Frankenstein, you know. Move on to the next one, please. And this is the one they used at the Waikato District Health Board, put in there by a dentist. And there isn't a dentist in New Zealand who would look at that slide and say that that person is suffering dental decay because of a lack of fluoride in their water supply. That is baby bottle decay. And that happens when you put honey on the teat, baby's crying, plug it in, they go to sleep happily sucking on the honey and whatever's in the bottle. Whether there's fluoridated water in that bottle or not is absolutely meaningless. And the guy who put that picture in that flyer that the Waikato District Health Board used knew that, but is prepared to, well, deceive the public. It's misleading advertising. Not good. What they put into the water supply for fluoridated Auckland amounts to, as far as I can figure out, something like 1,500 tonnes a year of hydrofluorosilicic acid. Now, hydrofluorosilicic acid is the waste product of the fertiliser industry. It's obtained by putting water vapour into the chimneys of the fert works, and that dribbles down and it's collected in a tank. It's contaminated with arsenic, cadmium, lead, all kinds of stuff depending on where the fertiliser ore is sourced from. That very same material is put into the tankers and is taken to your water supply system and tipped straight into it, unpurified, unaltered. Suddenly that category 8 toxic waste becomes good for you. I don't think so. Furthermore, only 1% of that water is actually drunk. The rest of it is released into the environment, largely into the waterways and the stormwater and stuff like that. And this is what's called the MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet for hydrofluorosilicic acid. And it says, do not allow material to enter sewer, stormwater drains or waterways. If spill may enter waterways, contact regional authority. Well, a regional authority are the people who are putting it in there in the first place. So what you're doing is you're paying the fert works to put this stuff in your water, whereas it is actually illegal to put it into any other water source in New Zealand. This is just crazy. It's what I would call the supreme example of a blunt instrument public health policy. If there's anything worse, I'd shudder to think what it is, but you know, really it's just out of date and it has to go. If there is any benefit from drinking fluoridated water, it is claimed that it is a topical effect. That is to say, it attaches itself to the surface of your tooth as you drink the water. Well, at 0.7 parts per million, the effect is likely to be negligible, given that the same people who promote fluoridated water are promoting fluoridated toothpaste at a concentration of 1,000 parts per million or more, saying that you have to actually scrub that in with your toothbrush and don't rinse your mouth out, spit it out and leave the residue in your mouth. And even that isn't powerful enough. They're saying 1,500 parts per million or even 3,000 parts per million to be effective. So the likelihood that 0.7 parts per million for the fleeting instant that it passes over your teeth is effective is just beyond the realms of logic to me. So you're drinking this stuff for no benefit. Toxicity. There's a pile this high of research about the toxicity of fluorine, despite the fact that the Ministry of Health tells you there's no evidence of harm. What they're saying really there is that they haven't actually looked, or they're not seeing the evidence of harm. That's not proof of safety. They're just not aware or not crediting the research that's been done. We have effects on the pineal gland, which is an organ in your brain which moderates things like your sleep patterns and the onset of puberty. We have your thyroid gland, which requires iodine to function properly. Well, iodine and fluorine compete against each other, and fluorine wins, so you have an iodine deficit situation arise in your thyroid gland function. Fluorine reacts brilliantly with calcium, so you're getting arthritic changes that take place, and the early signs of fluorine poisoning are arthritic changes, painful joints and so on. In China, there's been a large cohort of research into IQ effects. In China, the water wells in the villages are all endemically polluted with fluorine at very high levels in some areas, and they've collated the concentrations in different villages with the IQ testing, and they have a cause and effect relationship. Now, this sounds very dramatic. I know I'm not saying everyone who drinks fluorine is going to end up an idiot, but I'm glad I don't drink it. I think given that the burden of proof of safety doesn't lie with a vocal minority, the burden of proof of safety lies with the people who are promoting the medication. There's also an element to me, really, and it's one of the most important aspects of this whole debate, and that is that, and it's been diminished actually, and it's a deliberate plot, if you like, or a program to diminish it, and that is the ethics of the decision of an individual to choose not to have a medication. And they're saying it's not a medication, but I mean it's there to treat a disease. So what's happening is that you're having your right to drink clean water taken away from you. Why is fluoride the only medicine in our water? If it's that good and it's such an effective medium of treating disease, why not put a whole raft of medicines in there? Have a tap that you turn on a solid nutrient, just one tap does all. You know, let's eat the stuff, let's have everything in there. Why just fluoride? I don't believe that it's the council's responsibility to treat or to be responsible for treating a disease. If the council has enough on its plate to keep itself busy with running a big city, this is a health department issue. If we're going to have fluoride in the water, it should be a nationally legislated thing, and the responsibility should lie with the Ministry of Health. But they notoriously run for cover when it comes to saying that should be done, and I don't think it will be done. So yeah, here I rest my case. Finally, in New Plymouth, where we were able to convince the New Plymouth Council to remove fluoride from the water, and also in Waipukurau, where they also decided to take it out of the water, the newspapers printed virtually the same articles once the decision had been made. They said the council has decided to remove fluorine from the water as of today. However, we will continue to fluoridate the water supply until stocks are exhausted, because there's no other safe way of disposing of it. Thank you for your attention. Tēnā koutou whakaaro.
Thank you so much, Lawrie. This is amazing, isn't it? I want to introduce the next speaker, and it's Dr. Jane Beck. Dr. Jane is coming from Thames. Let's give her a round of applause.
It's great to see so many people here tonight, so thank you for coming. My name's Jane Beck. I'm a retired medical practitioner. I trained and worked in the UK, and my speciality was occupational medicine. This is very similar to public health because it's concerned with groups and populations of people and is particularly interested in preventative medicine. And so I think I feel it's appropriate that I'm here because I was concerned about protecting workers in the workplace from health hazards such as toxic chemicals. And here I am trying to protect the public against a toxic chemical. If you believe the newspapers that I've been reading recently, people like myself are nutters. We're fluorophobic conspiracy theorists. We overstate the negative effects. We're criminal. And I'm hoping by the end of this evening you don't agree with those opinions. It's also been implied that we don't really care about people because of all those poor people out there for whom fluoridation is such a wonderful thing. Well, we do care. And that's why we're all here today. So I'd like to talk to you about whether water fluoridation really is serving the greater good. In serving the greater good, a public health measure such as water fluoridation is aiming to reduce tooth decay. It's aiming to reduce the tooth decay gap, the inequality that we see between the different groups of people, and also improve their health outcomes, and in particular those who are more vulnerable. And the question here is water fluoridation achieving this? The reduction in tooth decay. Many claim that the reduction in tooth decay over the years in New Zealand is due to water fluoridation. And I think Laurie's already touched on this. And this is a graph that shows how tooth decay has come down in industrialised countries throughout the world, whether they've had water fluoridation or not. And in fact, if we give water fluoridation the credit for tooth decay reduction, we might as well give the weatherman credit for good weather. The two are only remotely connected. So I'd like to look a bit more closely at the tooth decay gap, so the gap between those who have tooth decay and those that don't, and see if this gap has actually been closed by water fluoridation. The 2009 New Zealand Oral Health Survey does confirm for us that some socioeconomic groups, and Maori, are particularly vulnerable to tooth decay, but not completely exclusively. If we look at the figures from the latest New Zealand Ministry of Health, 2011, what we see is that 54% are free of tooth decay, and we can also see here that Maori and Pacific Islanders are not quite so fortunate, with 41% and 39% only free of tooth decay. But what I'm particularly interested to talk to you about is the 46% that do have evidence of tooth decay, because this is the group that is at risk. This is the group that we're trying to protect. Just a reminder about DMFT. This is one of the tooth decay measures, the number of decayed, missing or filled teeth. And the capital letters indicate adult teeth, the 28 adult teeth that we see in 12-year-olds. And the 12-year-old DMFT is the way that we compare different areas, either country to country or region to region. And if we're looking at the baby teeth, the deciduous teeth, we use lowercase letters, and there are only 20 of those teeth. So of those with the 46% of tooth decay, we see that on average 2.68 teeth are affected by tooth decay. And in fluoridated areas, 2.5 teeth on average are affected by tooth decay. So this is the fluoridated areas that are supposedly protecting us from tooth decay. And the non-fluoridated areas, 2.84, giving this huge difference of 0.29 of a tooth. And that's just the raw statistics. It doesn't take into consideration any other factors, such as whether they brush their teeth or not. So if we look at these figures with fluoridation status, the column on the right-hand side is the average tooth decay measure in 1973, 10.7 teeth on average were affected in children of 12 years of age. And as you can see, whatever ethnicity or fluoridated area, it's considerably less. So we can be reassured that if we stop fluoridation, we're certainly not going to go back to the 1970s rate. But I think what this shows us particularly, the column on the right-hand side of each panel, the pale blue is the fluoridated area, and yes, it does appear to be slightly higher than the middle area, which is the right-hand side is the non-fluoridated, and the middle is the fluoridated. But we still do have 2.55 teeth on average affected in this 46% of 12-year-old children in New Zealand. Now this is the tooth decay that we need to address if we're going to close that gap of inequality. And as you can see, water fluoridation really is having no impact on closing that gap in inequality. The 5-year-olds is a similar story, but they actually got a lot more tooth decay. They've almost got twice as much tooth decay on average. They've still got a very small difference between the fluoridated and non-fluoridated areas. And they've got more tooth decay because of baby bottle tooth, which Lawrie alluded to. So this is the sucking on those bottles, whether they've got fruit juice, whether they've got milk in, whether they've got sugary drinks in. When the baby's sent to bed with it, that prolonged exposure to sugar and other sugary foods is what causes this. This happens in fluoridated areas and non-fluoridated areas alike. And that's why in the 5-year-olds, the tooth decay rate is so much higher than in the 12-year-olds. Water fluoridation is not going to stop this. How can we close the tooth decay gap? What will stop the baby bottle tooth decay? Are there any other public health measures that will get better results? Dr. Robin Haseman-Welsh, who's our Chief Dental Officer at the Ministry of Health, gives us a clue. She says there is good evidence that establishing good oral health habits early in life pays dividends over a lifetime. Decay at age 6 is a strong predictor of dental decay at age 26. Habits is the operative word here. We're talking about habits that you gain when you're a child, you still have when you're 26 and when you're 76, and you pass them on to your children. Drinking fluoride doesn't give you good habits. A recent study in Australia by Armfield et al. Also gives us some clues. Here they looked at the consumption of sugary drinks and water fluoridation and tooth decay. And it was a useful study because they looked at a number of confounding factors. Now, these are factors which also affect tooth decay, like toothbrushing and socioeconomic status. And these are things that the school dental service statistics that I showed you earlier do not take into consideration. What you'll see next is figures which independently from other factors are having an impact on tooth decay. So first of all, our water fluoridation is reduced now to 0.1 of a tooth, whereas brushing teeth twice a day versus once a day or less gives us a benefit of 0.27 teeth saved. And if you don't drink lots of sugary drinks, then you can save 0.27 of a teeth. Now, of course, this didn't take into consideration other sugary foods or anything like that. We know from the Oral Health Survey that 36.5% of New Zealanders' children don't brush their teeth twice a day, and Maori and low socioeconomic groups particularly are unlikely to brush their teeth. And another factor which actually wasn't covered in the Armfield study is they're also less likely to visit dentists. So if we're going to close the tooth decay gap in New Zealand children, then they need to be brushing their teeth twice a day, and they need to be cutting out the sugary drinks, and they need to be visiting the dentist. So public health measures just bring these about. School-based toothbrushing programs to create the habit of regular toothbrushing. Health education to create the habit of healthy diets with no sugar, or less sugar at least. And the habit of seeking help through your dental services. Now, the community oral health service departments over the years have provided free school dental service, and they do give some level of health education and toothbrushing advice, but preschoolers haven't really benefited much from this, and actually the school-based toothbrushing programs have not been conducted widely. However, in the Waikato, they have put some emphasis on this over the recent years, in particular the school-based toothbrushing programs, and they've targeted preschoolers, as well as encouraging them to enrol in the dental service, and they have actually been closing the gap. The first thing I'd like to point out about this is the Waikato statistics, and these are the number of children who are caries-free. The pale column on the right-hand side is non-fluoridated areas. The one in the middle is fluoridated. You can't see the dates very well. 2005 on the left and 2006. If you see from 2006, the right-hand column, which is the non-fluoridated area, has had more children free of tooth decay than the fluoridated areas, and that has consistently persisted right through to 2011. And there's been an increase, an exponential increase here at the end, from 2010 to 2011. They've increased their numbers free of tooth decay from 50% in 2010 up to 61% in 2011. However, they've done even better with the Maori and non-fluoridated areas. A massive jump between 2010 and 2011 from 27% free of tooth decay in non-fluoridated areas, 5-year-old Maoris, to 52%, almost the same as the 54% that's the national average. And that is just by encouraging toothbrushing, improving diet, and getting them to the dentist. The other aim in public health is to improve health outcomes for all, but of course particularly those that are most at risk. So, is water fluoridation actually improving health outcomes, or is it perhaps worsening them? Is it reducing health inequalities or increasing them? So far, I've shown that it's not responsible for reducing tooth decay, and it doesn't close the gap of inequality. But is it actually having other health impacts? I'd like to look at babies, the 0 to 6 month old babies. The Ministry of Health recommends that 0 to 6 month old babies should have 0.01 milligrams per day of fluoride to reduce tooth decay. Babies' teeth erupt around 6 to 10 months of age. We know that fluoride doesn't work by swallowing it, it works by directly acting on the teeth. They've set an upper limit of 0.7, which is based on this 0.1 milligrams per kilogram per day, because that's the level at which moderate dental fluorosis occurs. So the intake, if you're a breastfed baby, you do get about 0.01 milligrams per day, and that's because that's what they base that limit on, the breast milk amount. But if you're a formula-fed baby, being made up with fluoridated water, the amount of fluoride you're getting is somewhere between 0.55 and 0.78. So you can see that it's considerably more than the adequate intake that they don't actually need, and in many cases is over the upper limit being the limit at which you have increased adverse health effects. So even by the Ministry of Health standards, formula-fed babies are at risk of adverse health effects. And the upper limits is an interesting thing. The Ministry of Health here has 0.1. But the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry has a much lower one of 0.023, and the Environmental Protection Agency of 0.06. So why should they vary so much? Well, I think the US National Research Council produced a review of fluoride in drinking water in 2006, and maybe some of them have read this and have reduced their levels. So we're using fluoride exposure here rather than water levels, because actually it's much more accurate, milligrams per kilogram per day, because of course we're all different sizes. And what the National Research Council, a body of 51 scientists headed by 3 professors, came to the conclusion that at 0.05 to 0.1 milligram per kilogram per day, there was an increased risk of altered thyroid function if iodine intake was adequate. But if it was not adequate, then the risk of altered thyroid function from fluoride exposure would occur at a lower level of 0.01 to 0.03. The Research Council also looked at whether people drinking fluoridated water at 0.1 milligram per litre would reach these levels, and they concluded that these are the sort of levels that they would reach, 0.03 to 0.1, if they drank average amounts. And those people that drink more, maybe because they're labourers or sports people, or because they have diabetes, were likely to be well over the upper end of this limit. Is our babies, who are well and truly over the limit with their formula. So the altered thyroid function is presenting as subclinical underactive thyroid, and it can present with weight gain and low energy, depression, raised cholesterol levels, constipation, and in pregnancy, the baby is at risk of being born with reduced IQ. And in children, it's associated with slow growth, short limbs, and delayed tooth eruption. I think it's particularly a serious problem here in New Zealand because, as you probably know, we don't have much iodine here in our soil and water, and therefore we don't have much in our food. And in the adult nutrition survey in 2008-9, they found 79% of the adults surveyed were iodine deficient. So we're particularly vulnerable here in New Zealand to the toxicity of fluoride. In the Ministry of Health nutrition guidelines, it acknowledges that formula-fed babies are likely to be exposed to increased amounts. What they actually recommend is, they say it's possible to reduce concentrations by preparing formula using non-fluoridated water, such as rain-filtered or spring water. Well, opting out of fluoridated water really is not very easy or cheap. For most of the low socioeconomic groups, the only option is going to be bottled water. This was my own estimate, $730 a year. That's a lot of money for somebody that doesn't have much income. When at the Hamilton Tribunal, there were a couple of mothers who got up and talked, who had children, and they talked about the struggle and the guilt they felt in trying to provide formula for their babies, which was made with bottled water, when they couldn't actually afford to buy enough of it to give them it all the time. The filters, I bought one of these absorption filters and was shocked to find that it didn't really take the fluoride out. And I recently had it tested because I thought I'd be clever and add an extra one, and it didn't remove any more. But what it did was it added aluminium into my water by 20-fold. So I've had my fluoride filter removed now. And even the expensive reverse osmosis, which pretty much makes your water dead, still doesn't manage to remove all the fluoride. And of course, Maori and Pacific Islanders don't breastfeed as much as others, so they're much more likely to be formula-fed. So, is water fluoridation in service to the greater good when formula-fed babies exceed the upper limit? And Maori and Pacific are less likely to breastfeed, when it gives them the increased risk of moderate dental fluorosis and the increased risk of altered thyroid function, not to mention a whole host of other health problems. And when opting out of the water, fluoridation is cost prohibitive for many. And so the low socioeconomic groups with formula-fed babies are particularly disadvantaged. in water fluoridation. So I don't think water fluoridation really is in service to the greater good. So water fluoridation is not a good public health measure. It does not reduce the tooth decay gap. But there are other good, effective public health measures which will reduce the tooth decay gap. And to be quite frank, if I was that child that was at risk of tooth decay, well, I'd rather be given the skills and the knowledge to take responsibility for the care of my own teeth. And then at least I would have the chance of avoiding those fillings that otherwise I'd get if I was relying on fluoridated water. Much better than being given an uncontrolled amount of a preventative medicine in my drinking water, which actually was going to be more toxic for me. And also it would give me the opportunity to pass my knowledge and skills on to my children and to future generations. And of course there are many other national public health things that they could be doing. They could be doing something about that baby bottle tooth decay. Wouldn't take much to have some great adverts out there. They could be regulating the sugar industry to try and reduce the sugar that's taken in. And think of all those health promotions and how much it would encourage healthier lifestyles in all different ways, leading to reduced obesity, diabetes and heart disease, as well as better health for all of us. And of course, as has been mentioned already, with no scientific research that proves the safety of water fluoridation, Maori, Pacific and low socioeconomic groups are particularly at risk, especially their formula-fed babies. And because of the disadvantages, prohibitive costs of opting out, low-income groups are particularly at a disadvantage. So water fluoridation will not stop this early childhood caries, the baby bottle tooth decay. Only behavioural change will do this. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Dr. Anna Goodwin to deliver her presentation.
Thank you all for coming out on this cool evening in Auckland. I'm actually the newest and the lesser member of this group. My name is Dr. Anna Goodwin. I put this picture of a sacred cow here because I'm from Hamilton and had to get that Mulu thing out of the way since I'm in Auckland. But sacred cows are quite amazing in that if you offend one of them, you become persona non grata. And the more I studied about the fluoride debate, the more I realized that there was quite a bit of offense of the sacred cow known as fluorine. And if you offended this sacred cow, you were oftentimes discredited as a scientist, as a physician. They try to call you a quack, an elitist, and all kinds of dirty names. She's only a sacred cow, by the way, because of a belief system. And we'll kind of describe that as simple BS down the track. I moved to New Zealand in 2009. I was employed as a locum at the Waikato DHB for 3 years and became vocationally registered in medicine here. I started a private practice at Braemar in January of 2013. I've got American board certifications in internal medicine, hematology, oncology, and palliative care. And I attained the level of assistant professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham before I left that institution. This is a tribute to my friends at Uncensored. Oops, brought down the house, hallelujah. But I was raised to question authority when it didn't make sense. I owe that to my mother. So I came to this fluoride debate only a few months ago. I was attending a Grand Rounds presentation at the Waikato DHB. I still have many good friends and collegial relationships there. And this one was about fluoridation. And the meeting started by the moderator saying, if any of you are from the media, you're invited to leave this minute. And a few people got up and left. And then he asked us to not speak anything about this meeting. And we were all kind of getting a bit nervous when the doors were closed and we were told that we couldn't speak about this meeting. And then the public health officer spoke, and there were many slides that showed how awful caries are, but they didn't show any numbers. And I vaguely started remembering this book I read once called How to Lie with Statistics. When you put bar graphs up and they have patient numbers of 2 or 3, they look very impressive. And there were no numbers there. And I got through the lecture and I just started questioning, well, what were they trying to hide? Why did they want the media out of there? And so I became an anti-fluoridation person, because I started actually looking at the literature that I'd never looked at before in my medical career. And sadly enough, I would say that's true of most medical doctors. We are not trained in this. We are told to accept fluoride at face value. We don't look beyond the veil because we had other things to think about. My observations in becoming part of this, this movement, as it were, are that health effects are not found if they're not looked for. And the truth is stifled when those who know refuse to speak. There is no one so blind as one who refuses to see, or so deaf as one who refuses to hear. And it is the love of money that is the root of all evil. The Hamilton Tribunal was a real eye-opener. And it was really an amazing exercise, because those of us on our team, we sat around and we talked. We were actually given a list of questions by the tribunal. And the pro-fluoride people were also given similar questions. And we found that we agreed on 4 things. And that fluoride actually works topically, not by ingestion. It doesn't work when you swallow it. Toothpaste is actually harmful if swallowed. Brushing teeth and reducing sugar are effective strategies at reducing tooth decay, and that one must actually have teeth in order to benefit from fluoride. So why all the fuss about getting it out of our water? Is it just because it's free and we think it's good for us because that's what we've always been told, i.e. we love the status quo? And is it really government's role to prescribe medications to treat the masses to possibly help a few? I got looking at one of the laboratories in the States that does a lot of actually it's one of 2 laboratories that's charged with making weapons grade uranium. The Los Alamos National Laboratory. On their website, they acknowledge that fluorine is the most electronegative element. It reacts with everything. Both elemental fluorine and fluoride are both highly toxic. The maximum allowable concentration for a daily 8-hour time-weighted exposure is 0.1 parts per million. They acknowledge on their website that fluoride may cause cancer. But in New Zealand, our ambient background level in our water supply is 0.2 parts per million. How can it then be reasonable to try to correct our, quote-unquote, correct our fluoride levels to 0.75? Now, fluoride does have a history in the United States of being stockpiled after World War II. We had heaps of it. We had millions of pounds of fluorosilicic acid that was sitting around after the manufacture of all of our weapons for World War II. I dare say they didn't have really good means of containing this substance because it corrodes cement. It is not very kind to glass. It's not kind to anything. It takes double-lined plastic containers to contain it. So I would imagine that you had a lot of these military types that were sitting around wondering what to do with this stuff. And lo and behold, we started fluoridating municipal water supplies with it in 1947, curiously enough. They did a couple of studies on rats and found that because the rats absorbed the fluoride just as well as the calcium fluoride that would have been the natural product, that it must be okay. We're still giving fluoride and we're just going to put it in the municipal water supply. And they were away laughing with it. So in the 1990s, we began to study fluoride again, almost 50 years after the event. Nothing like timely medical coverage. And so a lot of health effects started resurfacing in the 1990s, and we realized that fluoride is an enzyme poison. It's also a genotoxin. It can cause teratogenesis. That means mutations, and it changes a lot of things about the cell, and it creates a great deal of oxidative stress. So what is New Zealand, like most of the fluoridated world, getting? We're not getting calcium fluoride. The pro-fluoride experts harken back to the good old days when calcium fluoride was used, and they want to bash us over the head with this data and say, oh, don't you know anything? But we've moved well beyond that. For a brief interval of time, synthetic sodium fluoride was used to fluoridate our water. That's also been used as a raticide. No, we actually use hydrofluorosilicic acid, also known as hexafluorosilicic acid, and several other names, also known as acid sand. It has about 20 different names. It exists in sort of an equilibrium with many different compounds because it is highly reactive. It's one of the most corrosive substances known, and as Lawrie and Jane acknowledged, it's not legal to dump it in any natural water supply. So that's why Hamilton had to use up what they had on hold, because we couldn't dump it anywhere. So hydrofluorosilicic acid, not all fluoride sources are created equal. This is an industrial waste product. It's produced by the manufacturing of phosphate fertilizer, as Lawrie indicated. Our source is Orica. It's a multi-billion-dollar multinational company, averaging about $4 billion per year. So we're literally in a David and Goliath type situation. We're a few concerned citizens with big mouths, and we're dealing with big government, we're dealing with big industry. They do allow up to 200 milligrams per kilo of lead in hydrofluorosilicic acid. And it was never intended to be a pharmaceutical grade product. It's several different products. It's not one product. It is regarded by the EPA as a toxic environmental pollutant. And in the States, it costs about $7,000 per tanker load to dispose of it if it's not dumped in our water supply. So how does putting it in a human water supply change it to a beneficial additive? Is it a nutrient? No. There is no requirement in the human body for fluorine. Is it a supplement? Well, you're not allowed to say that you're treating something with a supplement according to the New Zealand Medicines Act. So it's not a supplement. Go ahead. Now, ethnic minorities have a unique ability to absorb more lead, cadmium, and arsenic because it's related to a vitamin D dependent enzyme that's meant to help them absorb calcium, okay? They don't get as much vitamin D. They need more sunlight than Caucasians in order to absorb vitamin D. So when they're not getting enough sunlight, not getting enough vitamin D, this gene goes up so that they can absorb more calcium from their gut. The problem is lead has the same charge. So if you're getting this lead in your diet, you're going to absorb it. And it's been proven in the States that black children actually absorb twice the lead that white children do. Their lead levels are dramatically higher in fluoridated water areas. We learned a little bit about lead back when we used to put it in our tanks, didn't we? This is back in the 60s and 70s when children had a lead level of 60 micrograms per deciliter. Up to the present, our level is about 10. The CDC recommends that it should be less than 5. Different groups of people are more susceptible to harm from lead, and we don't really need it in our water. There are no safe levels of lead for human consumption. There are no safe levels of arsenic. Both of them are acknowledged to be carcinogens. They're also toxic to nerves, to endocrine organs, to the brain. Fluoride is not at all required. Okay? The mean acceptable value is simply an arbitrary designation which describes what is a tolerable level of ambient pollution, not what is actually best for human health. It's like a little bit like the recommended daily allowance that simply prevents you from getting scurvy in relation to vitamin C, but it's not necessarily what is actually good for you. Again, HFSA is numerous different things. We don't even have the methodologies to analyze it because it's in flux. You put it in the water and you don't know what you're going to get, really. It's highly reactive. It doesn't dissociate completely in gastric pH. And these silicofluorides, but not sodium fluoride, have been found to increase lead uptake in the blood and calcified tissues such as bone and teeth. As we mentioned, this was substituted back in 1947, endorsed by the Public Health Service without any human or animal safety testing. They were looking to deliver the fluoride to the tooth. They didn't look beyond that. They got as much fluoride in the tooth, they moved on, marching to their drum. So what toxicological safety data is missing for fluorosilicic acid? You could say basically all of it. We know nothing about its effect on development. We know nothing about whether it causes cancer. We don't know if it causes teratogenicity in newborns. We don't know how much it's poisoning our environment. We don't know if it's poisoning animals. We don't know about the long-term chronic effects on human beings. And Europe has recently banned it as far as a biocidal agent because they recognized that there was no toxicologic data in 2006. So in essence, our drinking water is being used as an industrial toilet and we are paying for it with a thin rim of protection called Sanitize for Your Protection. This is what the Public Health Service does for us. And we've got this, it would make me feel good drinking out of that toilet, I must say. I think Voltaire said it best. Those who can make you believe absurdities can get you to commit atrocities. Water fluoridation is not settled science. There is not much science at all. Dental fluorosis is actually a measure of toxicity to fluoride. It's much more than cosmetic. And there's no such thing as one size fits all in terms of a medicine for the entire public when we're all different. No one drinks the same amount of water. No one has the same health concerns, the same body mass. It's a disaster. So if we acknowledge that fluoride is a medicine, and it seems to meet all the criteria because we're giving it to treat a specific problem such as dental caries, we're using a drug to do that, it is being administered for a therapeutic purpose, they don't get to skirt the issue. They are practicing medicine. There have been no randomized trials of water fluoridation. And, you know, it's one thing to test a drug and to prove that it's safe and efficacious to treat a disease state. But I agree that you actually need a higher level of proof when you're going to treat well people with this drug. And you don't know it's safe, and you don't even know if it's efficacious. We have no business doing this. There have been absolutely no randomized trials of this drug for this treatment. Nothing to look at safety. So why have most European countries dropped water fluoridation? Indeed, 98% of Western continental Europe have rejected, banned, or stopped fluoridation due to environmental health concerns. The Czech Republic thought it was an unethical, forced medication. Belgium did not see it was their task to give medicinal treatment to the public. And even Germany felt like it was not their role to prophylact against illness unless it was caused by drinking water. So who's prescribing an unregulated medicine with no control over the dosage? Well, I would say the Ministry of Health. And, you know, Orica makes the product. They're benefiting from it. And they make $4 billion a year. I think they can afford to work on modifying the fluorosilicic acid and finding a more acceptable way to dispose of it. So they're prescribing a drug without a medical license, without any knowledge of the patient, and without any responsibility for the patient. To every person who's drinking the water, regardless of age, health status, body weight, presence or absence of teeth, without proven safety, without proven efficacy for the stated therapeutic purpose of preventing caries, presumably in 3 to 5 to 15-year-olds. Because by implication, their parents are basically lazy and stupid and can't be trusted to have children brush their teeth or reduce dietary sugar. My goodness, that sounds like cultural elitism. What if tooth decay in the poor and disadvantaged were epilepsy instead? Would we allow the government and Ministry of Health, not doctors, to prescribe Dilantin in the water for every person, regardless of age, size, body weight, seizure status, and health status, whether or not they needed the medication, whether or not they wanted it, and whether or not it was safe for them, to benefit patients with epilepsy who were having seizures because they couldn't be bothered to take their medication? Would we do this? The only difference is that we are emotionally attached to fluoride because we've been programmed for years and years with propaganda that's been very skilled in just making this argument for us. And of course we all want to help the poor kids. We're here because we care about the kids, and we absolutely don't think they need to be poisoned any longer. So what are the potential health risks to formula-fed infants with excessive fluoride? Well, dental fluorosis, which is not just cosmetic. There's an effect on the growing brain and neurocognitive development, lower IQ, and I think autism, we are seeing so many kids with autism in westernized countries that fluoridate water, and I've actually gotten on a few blog sites and just was horrified that many of these parents they're desperate to find solutions for their children, and there's so many people that have observed that their children's behavioral issues and their stimming are reduced when they get them off fluoride. There's got to be some sort of connection. Fluorine is concentrated significantly in the pineal gland, up to 15,000 parts per million, and it can definitely change pineal gland function. The pineal gland is responsible for making melatonin. It's responsible for our ability to, fight off depression and other psychiatric issues, bone effects, and also there's an increased risk of obesity and diabetes. As Lawrie mentioned, there is a risk of reduced IQ. This was a study done in China. Curiously enough, because we don't want to know about it, there have been no studies in westernized countries that fluoridate their water. We just assume not know. 10% of the children at risk for lower IQ and mental retardation with fluoridated drinking water had levels of 1 milligram per liter. Not much different than what we're contemplating here. And again, the risk of lower IQ is more severe if there's also concurrent iodine deficiency. If any of you have ever watched a child brush their teeth, how could we ever know what dose our kids are getting? I mean, for Pete's sake. There's the supposed optimum dose of 0.05 to 0.07 per kg is really kind of moot, because you can't control what that kid is drinking and swallowing, and it's just an impossible task. We'll just say that. So why should I swallow fluoridated water? I can't think of a reason, really, especially if you don't have teeth. So I'm a little bit of a fish out of water with infants and fluoride. That's not my area, but fluoride is excluded from breast milk. That means babies were never meant to have it. It's not a nutrient. Ingested fluoride provides no benefit to kids without teeth. The optimal dose is 0. Formula made with fluoridated water provides an unsafe dose. And we should ask the Auckland Council if they can provide a safe dosage for all bottle-fed infants. Safety testing in this age group has not been done for fluorosilicic acid. No one can say that it's safe for infants, and there may be uncertain long-term adverse health effects that we haven't even begun to understand. This is an unregulated, unethical experiment without the informed consent of children and their parents. Other vulnerable subgroups include pregnant mothers with medical conditions, gestational diabetes, hypothyroidism, iodine deficiency, formula-dependent children, children with nutritional deficiencies and heavy metal exposures, individuals with high fluid demand such as athletes, laborers, military workers, miners, people with undiagnosed diabetes or poorly controlled diabetes, people with impaired kidney function, elderly, patients with multiple medical disorders. New Zealand has an ethnically diverse population with diverse health risks. There are over 60 million people in India that have been poisoned by excessive fluoride in their deep water wells through contamination. Skeletal fluorosis, as well as thyroid and heart disease in Indians, are extremely common. 17% of New Zealand's skilled immigrants come from India. There are currently almost 75,000 Indian students here in New Zealand, and Chinese immigrants also have similar toxicity in their environment because of mining and contamination of their well water. These are areas in India where fluoride toxicity is quite endemic. The red areas, they've documented 70 to 100% of the children there have evidence of fluorosis. Yeah, fluoride's really good for your bones. This is one of the most devastating things that's happening in India right now, and there's no cure for it. These people have horrendous pain. Basically, their spinal cords begin to collapse, and the nerves are damaged, and they have nothing to do for them. It's quite a devastating thing. The pineal gland, we really need to study this. It's highly important. I'm studying a lot about aging medicine and as well as carcinogenicity. And there's a big link between melatonin levels and breast cancer and also probably prostate cancer patients. One single animal study showed decreased melatonin and early puberty in excess fluoride levels. This also affects sexual maturation, sleep cycle, bone loss, and neurodegenerative diseases such as cancer. Neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, as well as cancer. In Australasia, we have the highest cancer incidence, and we don't really know why. I would also point out that the second and third highest cancer incidence are also in areas that fluoridate their water. But we're in the purple, and that's at the very top of the list. Almost 30% of New Zealanders die of cancer. There are 51 new diagnoses and 22 cancer deaths per day in our country. Almost 19,000 diagnoses per year and almost 8,000 deaths in 2009. The most common cancers we have are colorectal, breast, and prostate. These cancers are generally thought to be related to environment. And one of the things that's gotten on my nerves for a long time is the fact that we know this. This has been in the medical literature related to oncology for a very long time, and yet we don't give any people any constructive advice about environment, and we don't want to talk about what the environmental things are. And I think that's almost shirking of our duties to some extent, because I think people are very keen to avoid these diseases if they possibly can. And I think that we have to start looking more at what we're doing to our environment, because we're clearly doing a lot of things that are not agreeing with humanity. Is there a link between cancer and fluoride? There have been about 50 population-controlled, mostly retrospective studies that have been inconclusive, but I would not say less inconclusive than arguments in favor of water fluoridation. The cancer link is neither proven nor disproven with regard to fluoridation. Most references do mention that it may cause cancer. The age-dependent exposure in young males and the risk of osteosarcoma does show the most compelling trend, and this is also supported in animal studies. Fluoride is easily taken up by bone and can affect many growth pathways in bone. There is a definite link between heavy metals such as lead and arsenic exposure in many different cancers. So is fluoride contributing to the disease burden of fluoridating nations? Public health investigation of epidemiologic data on disease and mortality in Ireland was related to water fluoridation and fluoride exposure. This was published by Declan Waugh in February 2013. He compared the World Health Organization data for the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, found a significant increase in disease burden for early onset dementia, SIDS, congenital hypothyroidism, osteoporosis, Down syndrome, depression, diabetes, and cancer. So in summary, fluoride is being used as a medicine. Its medicinal use is not supported by sufficient scientific evidence to justify this use. Significant portions of the population may be predisposed to adverse side effects from it, including the intended targets of the therapy. The long-term safety of fluorosilicic acid has not been established. Significant portions of the population object to forced medication without their consent. It is therefore medically unethical. Fluorosilicic acid is an unsafe industrial waste product and should have never been put into human drinking water, full stop. Weighing the evidence, the key problem is that there is a lack of good quality evidence of both the effectiveness and harm. The science is not only unsettled, it is virtually absent, especially for fluorosilicic acid. Proponents of fluoride ignore the thousands of human and animal studies that suggest potential harm from water fluoridation. A more balanced reading of the evidence is that water fluoridation has little benefit in caries prevention. It is a poor delivery mechanism. It causes dental fluorosis and may have long-term harmful effects. Fluoride is effective when applied topically, but is potentially harmful when ingested. It is akin to drinking sunscreen instead of putting it on your skin. One size does not fit all, never has, never will, and the burden of proof for safety should be with the Ministry of Health and Government. First rule of medicine is to do no harm. Sometimes it is better to do nothing about a problem than to intervene with a faulty solution. We must always consider the potential for harm and unintended consequences with any medical intervention. In the absence of clear benefit for the therapeutic target and the potential for real harm for those not targeted, it is sensible to cease drinking water fluoridation immediately. The definition of quackery is the promotion of unproven or fraudulent medical practices. I would say that fluoridation of the drinking water falls under this umbrella, and whether or not it's institutionalized quackery is still quackery. And where there is smoke, we do recall that in the 1950s, the American Dental Association recommended that we all smoke. And going back a little further in history, we have to be careful where the smoke is blown, as this is a device that was used in the 1870s to deliver smoke enemas. They were used for respiratory ailments, bowel and digestive problems, and they were about as effective as water fluoridation. And I couldn't resist this. This idea was given to me by one of the city council members in Hamilton, but he invoked the emperor's new clothes, and I had to put it in. And this is the sacred cow with skeletal fluorosis. So I'm closing on the Mulu note. Thank you very much.